worked. Hello everybody.
We're very excited to be here. We didn't think the technology was going to let us be here, but we're here, Jem and Alex, and we're going to talk about what remains of Edith Finch. I don't know why I just ever remember the name of the game.
It's quite a mouthful, but yes, it is a good game, definitely. I suppose the first question is, why is it one of our deep dive games, I suppose, because we've both played it, so I guess we'll start with talking about why we like it so much.
Yeah. Do you want to start with that?
I will find I will find a photo. We have a picture here somewhere we can look at more in a moment, but I can't remember when I actually first played it, but I'd heard lots of good things about it. There's a good overview of sort of the start of the game as you approach the house, and it starts with the line, "The house was exactly like I remembered it, the way I'd been dreaming about."
Bonkers house.
It's crazy. But yes, so a lot of people would describe it as more of a walking simulator game, but I think really it's much more of a sort of narrative-driven, story-led type of game, and because it goes really in depth about Edith and her family, because that's kind of the point of the game, is to explore Edith's family and what's happened to them as a family and the mystery around them. Also, do you think this should be a spoiler-free episode, or are we going to just talk about everything? It's hard to be spoiler-free, I think.
Yeah, I don't think we could properly explore the game without adding in the odd spoilers. And I think it's been out for long enough now that, if you haven't played it, then I think you should go and play it and then watch this.
Yes.
But you might need to watch this to inspire you. And I think actually it's one of those games where even if you do know about what's going to happen, it's an amazing game to play through.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I watched it last night. And my husband and I watched it because we both played it, and I watched it to remind myself of the thing of what had gone on in the game. So much fun to watch, actually, and just to see somebody else playing through it. So I think even if you had even if you watched all of this, I don't think it would. But yes, we should probably say that we probably will drop a few spoilers.
Yes. Also, I'm going to pop in a little content warning. Obviously, a lot of the story of the game revolves around death and how to deal with death and bereavement and the circumstances of different types of death. So if that's not something you want to hear about, then probably best not to watch some parts of this episode. Obviously, we won't be talking about it all the time, but it is one of the main components of the story, is the mystery behind the deaths of each of the family members. And you kind of explore their lives through the house. So you go into each of their bedrooms and kind of work your way through the house to the very top of the house.
Yeah.
And you find out more and more as you go. It is quite a mysterious, sort of eerie feeling game. I was a bit concerned when I booted it up because I'm not a horror fan, and it definitely gives off some of those vibes, because you're not quite sure what to expect when you go into this quite creepy, sort of weird looking house.
Yeah.
I definitely remember feeling quite apprehensive at first, but I think it's sort of comforting in its own way. I think the narration really helps of Edith, the main character, and that's when you realise, of course, that you're playing your protagonist is female, which is a nice thing to play, because there's not many of those games about, even though there have been obviously a little bit more in the recent years. But yeah, how did you find the integration of sort of text as you were exploring, and the narration as well?
I think. Well, I mean, when we saw in the first picture that you showed, you've got the text over the house, and the words pop up in all sorts of really interesting ways, and letters of words come through all the time. And I think that for me, I think one of the ways that these type of games are described as sort of walking stories, and I think that's probably is quite apt. But I think for me, they're interactive stories, so they are more narrative than action packed, and there's a lot less pressure on you as the gamer to push the story forward and to do things and solve things to move to the next stage. But it's a narrative process, and I think they haven't shied away from that by having the text coming up on the screen, actually physically being there as often as she's saying it, is a really nice way to honor the narrative roots of the story, but also whilst also making it accessible to people with all sorts of whatever needs that people might have. And I think that was a really nice thing with that, and then just sort of integrating it into the game, so it wasn't just block text at the bottom of the screen or anything like that, which it is in so many games. It's part of the thing. And I think there was one scene when I was watching it back through yesterday, I don't remember seeing this when I played it through, but I'm sure I would have noticed it. It's obvious, but there's a scene where she's holding a dandelion. And
yes, I think I remember
the
that.
dandelion seeds are sort of like blowing off the dandelion, but they are letters, and they're just floating away. And it's just little things like that are so delicately done, so thoughtful, and such attention to detail. And so for me, I felt like the words, they never really felt like a distraction from the game. They just felt like they were just you just listening to a story. There's a lot of journaling going on. There's all sorts of, so it's nicely integrated, I thought.
Yeah. It's definitely got a storybook feel to it. It's definitely one of those games you can sit and watch even if you're not playing, I think, as well, as you say.
Yeah. It's nice. I don't know if there's not, well, I was trying to describe it to someone earlier today, actually. I was saying that we're doing this thing this evening, and I was sort of saying, oh, and it's it's this amazing game, and there are sort of puzzly bits, but there aren't puzzly bits, and there's no fighting, but there is a bit of fighting. There's like something of everything in there, and I think they've been very very brave and honest in they've taken time to allow you to get to know each of the stories. So they've quite brave in that they've allowed you to kind of look around. And you could spend hours in some of the bedrooms, some of the rooms, couldn't you? I mean,
very easily, yeah. I think what's nice is they're also unique and individual. You can quite easily, they're quite distinct, each of the stories. They've got their own feel and vibe, depending on, obviously, the person that you're learning about and the person that's reflected. I think it's a really clever way of actually reflecting the character of the person in the way that the gameplay plays out for each section as well. And it ties in really well to the narrative of each person involved. Like, for example, one that I remember really distinctly is the baby. I can't remember their actual name. Was it George? I think it's obviously one of the saddest.
I'm so bad at names. I'm going to get the family tree up now.
And and it's where the baby really sadly does drown in the bathtub. But there's this whole sequence of them sort of being underwater and all these creatures around them, and it's quite a sort of, well, not bittersweet, but it's an adventure to the baby, and you're seeing it through their eyes and things. And then, of course, you come back to the present, and their parents are there, and they've obviously realised what's happened, but it's some of it can be quite. You have to be like emotionally prepared for a lot of the stories. Have some tissues on hand for sure.
Yeah.
But I definitely remember that as being a standout one for me. There's all sorts of them. I think one of the very earliest ones was one of the youngest girls who she gets really hungry and starts turning into
Because she'd
different
been shut
animals.
in her room, hadn't she, for being naughty?
That's
So
right.
she'd been
Yeah.
sent to bed without any dinner. Lest that be a lesson to you parents. Don't lock your children in their rooms.
But that one's really, really exciting because you suddenly realise you're an animal, or you're like I think it's an owl, and you catch a mouse. And that's one of the first bits of gameplay. And then eventually you turn into a monster, and you're like trying to eat people on a boat, which is it's definitely a sort of gothic edge to a lot of the storytelling, which is quite fun, I think, as well. I've always been drawn to more gothic stories, definitely.
I wasn't sure what happened to her though, because
No,
she ate some holly berries, so I wondered if she got poisoned
I was reading
that.
on
But
Wikipedia, I think it was, there's some research before this episode. I think it was fluoride in her toothpaste, or some kind of something in toothpaste and the berries combined, which was bad. Yeah, because I think at the very start you were reading something about toothpaste in the bathroom, in the mirror. It's all coming back to me now. It is very visual, but yeah.
I thought that was. I did get really stuck actually in that one.
Yeah.
When you're the strange creature on the boat, I got really. I don't know so the person who we were watching, I feel like I need to give him an honourable mention. Was Jacksepticeye. And I honestly don't know, like, whether he's he has come up actually on my radar a few times, but I'm so old that I don't really know if he's any good or not. But initially listening to him, because he's a game vlogger, so he was quite kind of like out there and very loud and commenting on everything brilliantly, but with a lot of energy, and the whole game has this very melancholic feel. So initially I was a bit like, oh, it's a bit jarring because it doesn't feel like the mood of the game. But actually, as he went through playing it, his whole thing toned down, and it was quite fun to watch him play it, because he's not the sort of person and I'm making sweeping judgments here because I don't know anything about him, but from what little I know of him, he didn't seem to me to be the sort of person who would play a game like this. And I think it's very demonstrating as to how what a wide audience this kind of game can draw, and how there is so much room in the game's world for actually being a little bit brave and telling these kind of stories. But that bit at the end, because he just did it, and it was no problem for him. But I remember me getting completely stuck and all tangled up in myself in the bottom of the boat, and getting really tied in knots, because you're this big long thing. And I don't know. And the bath scene that you mentioned as well, that was another place where the game mechanics, because it is quite an emotional scene, and it's a very emotional scene. And I remember getting to the end of it and just being like, oh no. But I couldn't get. There's a frog that you have to get to jump up and knock something, and I couldn't get it to work. And I was there for ages. I was getting really frustrated with him because I got so frustrated. I think it kind of took the edge off the story.
Yeah, definitely.
But again, I think that's just clearly me being incompetent gamer, because
I think I got stuck on the fish factory one for a long time. I was stuck on that for a long time.
That was fascinating, though.
That was a very good one. I'm just going to pull up a picture for everyone to have a look at one of the bedrooms.
Yeah, so
Whose
much
bedroom was
detail.
that?
That's Edie, the grandmother, isn't
Ah,
it?
of
She's
course it
like the
is. Yes.
matriarch.
Yeah.
But it just goes. It's all sort of slightly got this sepia feel to it that gives it that
Yes.
sort of slightly dusty, old,
Yeah.
comfortable. But I mean, there's so much detail, isn't there? Just in
I
that.
must play through it again. I'm sure there's loads of little things you can pick up on when you play through
Yeah,
another time. You can just tell. And
yeah.
especially knowing the end as well. What happens at
Yes.
the end.
Then you play it with a different
Definitely.
way of
Yes. Yeah. Because there was quite a mix also, obviously, of genders as well, which was interesting in of itself, I thought. Obviously, because they're all different family members, but just considering, like, the situations that they were in as well and the stages of their life was quite interesting. It's not like in any chronological order as well, which takes a bit of time to get your head around because you're trying to piece it all together in terms of who's related to who and what point they were in their lives and things.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you do have there is a family tree, and which we don't have a picture of, but it's interesting actually. I did a search for the family tree, and I just found a tweet from somebody.
Oh, well done.
Christopher de Bont, and they're saying it's been 2 hours since I finished Edith Finch, and I still haven't recovered from the magnificent series of emotional blows. So yeah, and then shared the family tree picture, but it's lovely because, like you say, you just sort of part of the game is all about learning who all these people are and whether they're how they're related and how they interact, and it's a real nice sort of delve into families and the strange things that go on in them. And I think I mean, I'd be surprised if you could find a real family where all these things happened, but you could definitely imagine any one of these things happening in the real world. There
Definitely.
are, there's some of them are a little fantastical, but it's not unbelievable. I think that's what's also so it sort of gets you.
Yeah. Just going to bring in a comment from someone here who says, Tom says he's meant to play this game for ages. You should definitely play
Yeah,
it.
you
I
definitely
heartily
should play it.
recommend.
Absolutely.
But yes, have those tissues on hand as well. Yes.
And the best thing about playing these games that are a few years older is that you can usually pick them up for next to nothing somewhere.
Definitely. Yes, I'm sure they'll be in a January sale somewhere if that's still on. Definitely. Yes. Yeah. I've got another picture here which you so kindly uploaded. I will just show it here. I remember this one quite distinctly as well.
Yeah.
This
Well,
one.
again, when we were watching Jack doing playing this through, one of the things that I noticed is that he as because you're on the swing and you have to swing the swing, and he every time, and it seemed like a really unconscious action, but every time he swung back, he moved back, and as he swung forward, he moved forward, and you could see he was like getting sucked into this. And that's even when he's sort of streaming and he's engaging with the audience. So this was one of those scenes where I was really like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, it is. It's quite emotional, definitely. I think the point when you realise, once you got halfway through, all right, this is going to be this story now. And then you're trying to work out at what point the death occurs or work out how it is. And then it suddenly hits you before you've had time to process it. You're like, oh, it's this is the moment. Okay. But yes, it was quite a sad one, that one. They're all sad. I mean, they're all sad. But yeah. And I just thought it was so fascinating, like just delving into the story of each of the family members and then how your perceptions changed depending on how they died as well. I found was quite interesting.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Yeah. And the fact that they use different styles to tell each of the stories as well means that you don't get bored as you go, as you're going through it. There's always something new, and I think, you know, that is one of the things that I suppose, you know, because I'm as much of a, you know, hack and slash gamer as anyone, you know, and I think combat is used as a as a as a tool to kind of give the player some active engagement in the game. And I mean, you know, I know there are puzzle games, but you know, but this doesn't use puzzles and it doesn't use combat, and it is telling a story, and yet, you know, and so there is this worry that, you know, it's just going to get a bit boring, it's just going to be a bit samey, but it isn't. And I think it's lovely the way you sort of dip into the stories, which have got these unique ways that they're told, and ways of engaging the I don't even know if you, what are we? We're not gamers. We're something else with games like this. But anyway,
Consumers of
yeah, the
media.
participants, you know, and it sucks you in, and then you pop out back into the house, into um in, into the character that you're controlling, and it's you have feel like you have more agency than actually you do. I mean, it's an extremely linear game, and yet it doesn't feel like that. It moves you gently from one story to the next with this, without I was really impressed because I did look at it with, I had my very hypercritical eyes
Yes, of
on,
course.
and
Yeah.
you know, and I was really very impressed and pleasantly surprised by that it held my attention, and that how well it managed these
I
issues.
definitely think there's something, I don't know what it is, but it definitely drives you on to want to discover more and more. Each time you come out of one story, you're like, I need to find out. You have to find out what the mystery is. And it
Yeah.
kind of drives you to keep looking through the house, in that sense, I suppose. I think one of the main things for me in terms of the atmosphere of the game was the music, which definitely helped with the sense of discovery. I think it was by, I want to say Jeff Russo. I'm going to double check because I want to make sure. I did have it on my Spotify playlist recently. Here's somewhere. Bear with. Talk amongst yourselves. Oh yes, it is Jeff Russo, who I believe also composed other soundtracks for things like Star Trek Discovery and Picard and Fargo and all sorts of things like that. So he's got some pedigree in sort of, especially Star Trek Discovery, I found was very narrative heavy. They obviously, I mean, Star Trek just is because that's what Star Trek is. But yeah, it's definitely got those sorts of feelings about it. And I'm definitely one to appreciate a good gaming soundtrack. So this one was definitely up there. It feels very sort of melancholy and chilled, but also very sort of mysterious at the same time. It's got lots of different emotions to it and layers, which I think reflects the stories of the game. And one of the bits of music I remember the most was during the fish factory section, where you eventually get caught up in, I think the character was Lewis, and his imagination and how he escapes the mundanity of working in the factory by imagining himself to be this great king. And so the music kind of builds up a picture of that world and Lewis's imagination, and it's one of the most memorable bits of music for me from the game.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that was that. I mean, that is one of the stories that I think they really had outdid themselves on, and I think there were so many layers within that I felt had been really carefully thought about and
Definitely.
carefully crafted. And I think the fact that you start off doing this fish action, and then he starts the adventuring, and you're controlling two different lines of his world, and which is really
It
difficult
got very
and
complex,
fiddly to start off
yeah.
with, and and it was, and then very quickly, you become adept at doing the fish because that's just so monotonous. And I think it was really interesting way of using the physical actions of the player to represent these emotional process that this man was going through, and also, you know, that people with mental health issues can experience this sort of, you know, just going through the motions and, you know, living your life in another world. And we talked about kind of gaming addiction and things like that as well, and how people can escape into games. And I think, you know, it was really interesting to have that referenced in this environment as well. The idea that, you know, somebody's escaping into this fantasy world that looks very much like a computer game world, you know. And I think there were so many layers. I think you could write a whole thesis just on that one section, that one character's experience. And the years ago when I was doing my degree, I learned a lot about the sort of symbiotic relationship between sort of people and machines, and the whole concept of cyborgs was, you know, around, and things like that. I mean, it was they weren't real cyborgs as science fiction, but like it talked about a lot about like how when you drive a car, the car becomes a kind of physical extension to yourself. So there's a sort of merging between the human and the mechanical. And I think with games like this, you sort of have a feel for like how actually, if it's done properly, you can take the, you know, if you're working with people who understand the psyche of people, you can kind of do these really interesting kind of combination things where do I end and the game begin, and that all sucks you in to the very depressing pinnacle of that story, you know. And I think that was a really good scene for me.
It was, and I think they dealt with it really sensitively as well. I think they deal with every story really sensitively, which is it's a very, very fine line, and it's very difficult to do, but I think they got it just right. I think it's Anna Perrin, I want to say. The people that just made 12 Minutes, the game.
Yeah.
Whoever they are. Anna Perrin. I don't know. It's a funny name, but they're very good, and well done for handling such big topics so sensitively as well. Yes. Yeah. It's one of the few games I can think of that actually deals with a lot of the storylines that we see, especially with Lewis's story as well. You know, like just suicide in general, and particularly in young men, is quite a big topic, and I don't often see that talked about within gaming spaces or in games themselves, really, unless I'm missing some ones that people want to drop in the chat. But I think it definitely deals with a lot of things that just aren't talked about in game stories.
Which is interesting, isn't it? Because that is kind of the underlying thing about the story, is about, you know, the family secrets, and that she was so much of this was kept from the main character through her life, and she and you know, I think there's a lot about that this is part of her heritage, and she almost has a right to that information, and it doesn't help to hide this stuff, you know, that this is part of your lives. But I agree, I think it's really good that they've that they explored it, and none of things that the topic, none of it was done salaciously. There was it wasn't it wasn't clickbait. It was, you know, it was handled very sensitively. So.
Just put that in. It's Anna Perrin Interactive. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
At least somebody knows what we're talking about.
Yes. But no, the only one I think that was a slightly odd one that stood out in a slightly less sensitive way was perhaps the storyline of the teenage girl, I think it was, that got possibly murdered. And it was like the
Yes.
Halloween comic-y type one. They actually licensed the use of the Halloween soundtrack for that section from the film, which is why the music sounds so creepy. But yeah, no, that one was the part I was most scared at, I think, because you're trying to escape the would-be murderer, or at least someone who's implied to murder the person that you're playing in that section of the story. But that was an odd style, that one. I mean, it was cool, but it was kind of like a hack and slash comic type.
Yeah, it was like
style,
a Pulp Fiction,
from what I remember. Yeah, that one stands out as well. I think they're all just so unique, aren't they?
I think that one was really interesting because watching Jack play it last night, where it was me and Jack were best buds now. Anyway, so watching him play it was that when he got the weapon in that scene, he just went around and hit everything with it. That was the first thing he did, was like hit stuff. Whereas when I was doing it, I was like not doing anything because I was so scared that I was gonna if I made any noise, something was gonna come and get me. So I was much more creeping about, and I was I just was really fascinated by that. I was is that just a personality difference, or is there some sort of more socialization thing about how like men and women approach these kind of games? So really interesting. But
that is very interesting. And also because it was like much more of a scary situation for a woman in that scenario. If you think about it from that point of view.
Yeah.
But, yeah. How long are we talking for? Because we've gone for about half an hour now. So I don't know.
Do you have any more to say?
I don't know. Do we have more to say? That's the question. I suppose the one thing we haven't really talked about in great detail is the actual end reveal, I suppose. So I don't know if we want to cover that or do it in another episode, or...
I don't know how. I can't remember how I felt about it when I originally played.
Yeah.
And so the problem is that now because I knew that it was coming, my reaction was not the same. So it's a shame because I don't know. I don't know. I mean, how did you feel about it?
I remember being quite surprised because I didn't obviously assume that the person I was playing walking around the house was actually pregnant at the time of
especially
playing.
Given like all the crawling around and jumping about.
Exactly. And jumping around and things. Yes, you do a lot of climbing in and out of windows and climbing trees and climbing ladders and all sorts of things. But yeah, it definitely surprised me. I remember thinking, well, that's not what I expected.
No.
I assumed that she was sort of younger, I think, but then I suppose it doesn't matter really how old you are of that age. But I guess it challenged some of my assumptions because I assumed that any character I'd play in a video game wouldn't be quote unquote encumbered with a small baby inside them. You expect characters you play to be sort of like, well, essentially agile and able and capable and things. So that from that point of view, I was quite surprised. But I thought it definitely put a new light on why she had gone to that house.
Yeah, it did, didn't it?
Yes, essentially, you were kind of reliving her journal to that child.
Yeah. And I think. Sorry, go on.
No, I was going to say. Then, of course, finding out that is the reason that she did die in the end was because of childbirth. It did make me feel, well, you at the end you kind of like you're torn because you're like, oh well, you're just dead now. You feel a bit, well, not pointless, but it does feel a little bit like you kind of knew it was coming, but then you didn't want it to happen at the same time.
No.
Yeah.
I mean,
There's
I
some
did
mixed
think that
feelings.
the birth scene was very brave, actually, where they had somebody coming
Yeah,
through the hotel. That was
that's
a
right.
really brave scene, and I think that it's. I think you're right. I think it does go to show that we feel like, yeah, pregnant women are sort of little glass structures that that just need to be kept in the corner, and you know, and the reality is for many women,
Mm,
that for most women, that you know, that's not your life, and you don't, you know, you do carry on doing things right up until the baby's born. And I think, you know, it's nice to see us. I was watching Wheel of Time, the new Time series, and there's in that where there's this pregnant woman, and she is kicking total ass, but you know, she's in labor, and you know, there is something about, you know, there is a vulnerability, whether we like it or not. There is a vulnerability there, but it's nice to see games like this where they're saying actually that you know, this is just a part of life, and there was something, the cycle of life, and that life goes on, and seizing the moment, and all of those aspects, I think, came through
yeah,
in the game. I just wanted to ask one thing about the house, because
yeah.
when we opened this evening, you said about the that you work your way up through the house, which you do. I had not concept it like that, and thought about it, and I thought, oh, I wonder what the meaning is of going all the way through the house in that way, whether there was some
Yeah,
meaning as sort of about the fact that you go up, up, up. Oh.
yeah, maybe like an ascension to, I guess, maybe higher knowledge, if you want to look at it that way. Or I guess the obvious one is an ascension to heaven. But yeah, there's all sorts of layers, isn't there, that you could take meaning from it. This is what I like about these types of games, is you can take what's important to you from it. You can interpret it the way that you want to, which is
Yeah.
something I always really enjoy about narrative games as well.
Mm.
But
And
yeah,
which is one of the beauties of reading as well, is that you know, you take away what you because you can use your imagination. So it's nice when you can get to do that in a game.
yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think that's pretty much
Oh,
said it all now.
yes, yeah,
I think if you haven't played it, I think you absolutely should go and play it. I think it's a brilliant game. You can probably pick it up for a bargain, and you're not having to invest hours and hours.
no, it's quite a
You
short
know, it's
game, which
quite a
is
short
good.
game, and it's a different game. It makes you think, and it explores topics that you know, games often avoid, society often avoids. So yeah, that's why it comes up on our top games
Yeah,
list
definitely.
often. So yeah. Well, thank you for joining us. Is there
Yes,
anything you
thank
want
you
to
very much.
add, Alex?
No, I don't think so, other than thank you very much, everyone, for watching. And if you want to see more from us, you know, we're always doing something on a Thursday at 7 o'clock, whether that be another podcast episode where we talk about gaming and feminism, or we could do a let's play, and all sorts of things. And we've got our bonus rounds on Tuesdays, deep dives like this one. And if you haven't already, go and tell your friends about us, like, share, and subscribe. You can comment on any of our videos, especially on YouTube. You can leave us 5-star reviews on Apple Podcasts and now Spotify. You can rank your podcasts on Spotify, which is excellent for us, so go do that if you haven't already. And I think that's everything I wanted to say. Did you have anything else, John?
No, I think you said it all. I
All
don't have
right,
to say anything other
cool.
than thank you very much. Goodbye.
All right, have a good evening, everyone. Bye. Bye.